Welcome back to The Explainer. For the last few years, the global obesity drug market has basically felt like this boutique, high-margin gold rush. But as the latest data is showing us that era, it's rapidly coming to an end. Today, we are breaking down the massive paradigm shift happening in the post-2026 obesity drug outlook. We're watching this industry transition in real time into a mass-market, volume-driven reality. The rules of the game have completely changed, and understanding this transition is absolutely vital if you want to know where the healthcare industry and, frankly, billions of investment dollars are heading next.
21%. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering number, and it represents exactly how much Novo Nordisk stock crashed in a single month following the release of their 2026 guidance. For a while, the market had basically priced in this illusion of endless, easy growth. But when that 2026 forecast hit, it completely shattered that illusion and sent absolute shockwaves through the entire pharmaceutical sector.
And that crash really reveals the central mystery we're unpacking today. We've got this stark contrast in the 2026 financial forecast between the two absolute titans of the market. On one hand, you have Novo Nordisk projecting a 5 to 13% decline in revenue and operating profit. That's their first negative growth forecast since 2017. But then, right next to them, Eli Lilly is projecting aggressive growth, aiming for $80 to $83 billion, which is roughly a 25% jump. So, why is one stumbling while the other sprints ahead?
To figure that out, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the 2026 valuation reset, then examine the new TrumpRx pricing pressures, look at the diverging survival strategies of our two titans, dive into next-gen supply chains, and finally, map out the 10-year roadmap.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, the 2026 valuation reset, going from hype to reality.
Look, the market panic we're seeing right now isn't necessarily a permanent doom and gloom scenario. It's a painful reality check. And the vulnerability really comes down to concentration. If you look at obesity-themed ETFs, which are essentially baskets of stocks grouped by this medical theme, more than 50% of the weight was held by just two companies, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. Because of that incredibly heavy tilt, when Novo's guidance cracked, it wasn't just an isolated event. The entire sector felt the structural tremors.
But the crucial point here is understanding where the value actually sits right now. Novo Nordisk's valuation, specifically its forward price-to-earnings ratio, has plummeted from a 2024 peak of around 28 times all the way down to just 12.5 times for 2026. I mean, the company is trading at less than half of its peak valuation. Analysts are actually placing Novo into a 4-star undervalued territory as the market digests this negative growth forecast. It is a classic case of the market resetting its expectations from hypergrowth to mature stabilization.
Moving on to Section 2, TrumpRx and Market Structure. Welcome to the era of pricing pressures.
We really can't talk about 2026 without looking at the macro environment. Specifically how new structural policies in the United States are completely rewriting the revenue math for these companies. The TrumpRx policy mandates most favored nation pricing, meaning U.S. patients get the absolute lowest price paid globally. Neutrally looking at the numbers here, they're wild. Wegovy drops from an old price of nearly $1,350 down to just $199. Zepbound drops from over $1,000 to $299. That is a staggering contraction in per-unit revenue that these companies have to account for immediately.
So what's the core mechanism actually driving this? It's the elimination of pharmacy benefit manager middlemen and their rebates. This fundamentally breaks the old pharmaceutical model. Companies can no longer rely on astronomical sticker prices. They are being forced into a brutal, low-margin, high-volume reality. Survival now dictates that you have to produce massive, unprecedented quantities of your drug with ruthless manufacturing efficiency just to maintain your baseline revenue.
Which brings us to Section 3, Diverging Survival Strategies, Speed versus Marathon.
Faced with this exact same high-volume, low-margin reality, these two titans have chosen radically different corporate philosophies. Take Eli Lilly's CEO, David Ricks. He says, good leaders love factories enough to destroy and rebuild them, and that perfectly encapsulates his aggressive science-first approach. Ricks is entirely focused on sheer speed and scale. He's getting personally involved in destroying R&D bottlenecks and has even spearheaded a $1 billion AI partnership with NVIDIA to accelerate drug discovery. His bet is simple. The one who builds the fastest and biggest factories wins.
But then you look over at Novo Nordisk's new CEO, Mike Doustadar, and he operates on a totally different frequency. He says, our business is a marathon, not a sprint. Doustadar is bringing this patient-centric humility back to Novo. Rather than just raw industrial speed, he's focusing on the entire patient journey. For instance, he's championing public trust initiatives like the SCOMAS study, which investigates how to better provide these drugs to lower-income regions. It's a strategy anchored deeply in long-term brand loyalty and societal integration.
So to kind of sum up this operational split, Eli Lilly is relying on internal megafabs and a sheer volume defense strategy. They're offsetting lower prices by flooding the market with supply, even going direct to consumer via Lilly Direct. Novo Nordisk, meanwhile, is pivoting to treat obesity almost as a lifestyle and consumer business, leveraging their self-pay NovoCare channels to bypass insurance uncertainties altogether. You've basically got industrial brute force on one side versus consumer lifecycle management on the other.
All right, part 4, next-gen tech and supply chains. How are they actually scaling up the cure?
Because, a strategy is really only as good as the product, and the science here is escalating fast. We started with standard single GLP-1s, which mimic one hormone for basic weight loss. Then we moved to dual agonists, like Lilly's Zepbound, which target 2 receptors. But the third step is wild, the triple agonist. Eli Lilly's upcoming retatrutide targets 3 separate receptors, projecting nearly a 30% weight loss, which essentially matches the results of bariatric surgery. Meanwhile, Novo's advancing CagriSema, which uniquely focuses on preserving muscle mass while you're losing the fat. The science is moving from how much can you lose to how healthily can you lose it.
And this science leads directly into our next huge logistical hurdle, the shift from injections to pills. Currently, drugs like Wegovy are peptides. They're highly complex, expensive to produce, and require strict cold chain refrigeration. But the post-2026 future? It belongs to small molecules, like Lilly's oral drug Foundayo. Small molecules are cheap, mass-producible, and they don't need refrigeration. Even though Foundayo faced some early execution risks, its massive manufacturing cost advantage means it's likely going to dominate the long-term maintenance phase of obesity treatment. To really grasp the sheer scale of this industrialization phase, just look at the jaw-dropping capital being deployed right now. Eli Lilly is pouring over $50 billion into greenfield projects, building these massive internal megafabs from the ground up to ensure they never run out of supply. Novo Nordisk, realizing they were lagging behind a bit on manufacturing, spent $11.7 billion to acquire Catalent, essentially buying their way into an integrated supply chain to fix those bottlenecks. This isn't just pharma anymore. We are talking about advanced global logistics. Which brings us to our final section, part 5, the 10-year roadmap. What actually happens next? With all of this massive infrastructure in play, here's how the structural growth maps out beyond the turbulence of 2026. From 2026 to 2028, the focus is entirely on completing that massive manufacturing scale-up and launching the cheaper oral drugs. Then, from 2029 to 2032, we enter the indication expansion era, where these drugs evolve way beyond obesity and become foundational treatments for things like chronic kidney disease, fatty liver disease, and even Alzheimer's. Finally, by 2033 to 2035, the industry hits the patent cliffs, which opens the floodgates for cheap generics and turns these treatments into universal standard care. To put that into perspective, to give you a real sense of the monumental scale of the shift, J.P. Morgan projects that by the year 2030, 25 million Americans will be actively using GLP-1 drugs. 25 million. This is no longer some niche aesthetic treatment. It is becoming a foundational pillar of global public health. It's fundamentally altering everything from national insurance budgets all the way down to the grocery supply chain. Which really leaves us with this final vital question. Will the true winner of the obesity drug market be able to prove efficiency beyond innovation? We have spent years obsessing over the clinical trial data and the science. But as we look past 2026, the company that wins won't necessarily be the one with the most innovative molecule. It's going to be the one that can master the factories, navigate the brutal pricing policies, and actually deliver the cure to the masses. The science got them to the starting line for sure, but the supply chain will determine who finishes the marathon. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep an eye on those factories, and I'll catch you next time.